Welcome to Start an Angular Project Fast and then Go Faster. My name is Lucas Rubilke. I am the author of Angular in Action that actually just went into print like 2 weeks ago. And let me say this, if you can write a book, you can do anything. I also have some videos out on Egghead. There's actually a really good free series that I did about getting started with Angular. So that's on Egghead.io, totally free. Walks you through some of the basic syntax of Angular and how that works. This is going to lead into why I'm up here talking about Backend. I program because it's so intrinsically gratifying to create things. And the sooner and the faster I can do that, the better. And so now this is where Backend comes from. Full disclosure, I do not consider myself to be a back-end developer. I am a front-end developer who actually loves prototyping. And so when I found something that allowed me to just circumvent that, that is why I am up here, because back-end helps me do that very, very well. So a few things. We are going to be working out of a GitHub repo at this link here. And so all of my examples are going to come from here. And there's actually a really good write-up in the README. And so I'm going to be following along with that, going through that. But if you want to see what the app that we're building looks like, it's actually pretty gorgeous. So backend. Why backend? Of all the things in the world. So this is why I love backend. It's like a three-way love triangle here. Is backend was created to work with Angular, and the integration there is really, really solid. So now you have one great tool leveraging another great tool. I mentioned I'm not a backend developer. Jumping in and getting in a relational database tool and trying to set up my database and my relationships, and it's just not what I want to do. I'd rather probably spend some time at the DMV. But when we look at this, this makes sense to us. Well, we have this object and its task, and it has two fields, description, and it's a type of a string, and completed is a type of a Boolean. This is easy to reason about. I'm also a fan of Firebase, and I say this with love. It's very good as a real-time platform, but where I tend to get frustrated is when I want to actually have relations within my real-time objects. With backend, you get advanced data models. So again, being that we are all JavaScript developers, whether we'd admit it or not, we can look at this and we can reason what is happening here. That we have a task and it belongs to the members collection and so on. So it's really easy to define your data models using this JSON syntax, which I find to be really handy. My preference is that front end and the back end are delineated on a REST API. I think that is kind of where everything is going. And for me, not having to generate a REST API and worrying about that, by getting one for free is a big plus 100 for me. So once we generate our models in backend, then we automatically have our REST API ready to go, ready to consume. Occasionally you need to do some additional business logic when something happens. So for instance, before you save data, you may want to actually validate that data. Or during, if something goes wrong, you may want to roll it back. Or after you save something, you may want to send out a notification, an email, or some other third-party integration hook that does some additional work. The idea of me doing this on the server is mind-boggling. But as you'll see, as we work through some of these exercises, it's really easy to do using JavaScript. So, security and user management. Identity management is hard. With backend, it's really easy to manage your users, and using social providers, which now works right out of the box with backend, not only can you manually manage your users using email, password, etc., you can leverage these social providers to also manage your users. Third-party integration, again, something that I could do, would prefer not to go down a rabbit trail at least. So, for instance, right out of the box, you get Stripe, MailChimp, Mandrill, and PayPal. But I think we're missing one here. Amazon. One other thing, this means something to some people, not being a back-end individual. It's scalable and in the cloud. I do like this though, a free forever account. So if you create an account during this window of free foreverness, you get a free forever account that is free forever. This is the general idea when you set up a back-end application. So we're presuming that you have actually created an account and created an application. On the Angular side, you include your script dependencies, you add your module dependencies. From here, you configure your application to make secure calls. Then you connect to backend, and you then can read and manipulate your data. So this is what this looks like. Whirlwind tour. If we were in an elevator, this is what you'd get. We include our JavaScript dependencies. We use Angular cookies for session storage and the backend library. From here, we hop into our module. We include the backend submodule and ng cookies. Now we need to configure our application to make secure calls to the backend database or the backend. And so we simply need to set some tokens and we're good to go. You'll see what this looks like in just a moment. And from here, we can inject the backend service, call sign-in, pass in username, password, the app name that we're trying to connect. So if anybody has ever made a remote asynchronous call using Angular, this is pretty, I think this is pretty familiar. Once you call that, we get a promise here. We then store the token. Or if something goes horribly wrong, then we'll handle the error. Now that we're connected, we can actually call and interact with our backend. And so using the $HTTP service, we can do things like get, post, put, etc. And we just call the backend configuration API URL, do some magic here at the end to determine what we actually want to interact with. And there's actually some pretty complex and powerful functionality you can do on sort and filter. So you can pass those in. For instance, if you want to limit your result set or even create a custom query that you can then send back with your call. This is going to be phase one of what we're going to do. So we'll create an account, we'll create our app, then we're going to actually download the app from GitHub, and we'll create our database, and we'll set up our API keys. So I'm jumping to backend. I naturally have already created my account. Now we're going to create an app. So I'm going to call this AWS FTW. And that's all there was to it. So I just gave it a name and something descriptive. And then from here, you're going to be directed to this database setup page. And what you can actually do is if you hop into the GitHub repo, you can copy this JSON and paste it in. I've created a hotkey for it, but that would be the equivalent. And so what we have here is we're creating some boards, some notes that go in the boards. Naturally, we're having users, and then we're going to have a user boards table, which is kind of a linking table. And then a history table to store history. I'm going to click Next, and it's going to go ahead and set up the database. And while that is doing that, I'm going to just come up here. Just going to clone this to my desktop. Then we'll step into this. So you'll CD into the directory. Then we're also going to CD into source. And from here, we're going to install our Bower dependencies. So just Bower I. And I'm using the serve module. So npm install -g serve. There's a few other ones that do this, like HTTP server. Serve is just easier to type. And so from here, I can type serve, and it will show this on port 3000. But let's just do something else real quick. I'm going to use WebStorm to open up this app. So we'll get this set up. And I like WebStorm for two reasons. I think you can do this in Sublime, or apparently people use Vim to do web development, which is impressive. So I'm going to open up the notorious.js file. So this is the main entry point for this application. And this is where we're going to set up the application to make secure calls. So I believe I called this AWS FTW, something easy to remember. And then we're going to grab our tokens. Yes, it's ready. Okay. So to grab your tokens, you go to the security auth option on the side here. I would say it's a tab, but it's not really. And we're going to just go ahead and set up anonymous access now. I recommend that you set this to read only. Obviously, this is contextual. You may actually want to give your anonymous users various privileges, but in this case, we're going to go with read only. I'm going to grab this token here, and I'm going to paste this in here. And then let's actually grab our signup token as well. And now that I've actually put these in here, I can go up here. Now, one of the cool things is that once you create an app, the account that you're signed in as automatically gets added as a user. Now, let's talk about some things that you can do in Backend. So you have this objects menu here, and so you get an object for everything that you've created. So, for instance, we have boards, history, notes, users, and so on. One of the cool things that you can do is, as I mentioned, set server-side actions. So, for instance, when we create a board, we want to add that user as a default user for the board. So when you create a board, you get added to that board. So what we're going to do here I'm going to hop into the boards model, and we are going to create a REST API hook. And so we have this method here called createDefaultMember. And what this is doing is we are doing a get, but we're sending in, you can see here, objects, actions on the boards. We're passing in the board ID, and we're sending in a name of addDefaultMember. So what we can do here is create a new action, and we're going to create this action and call it this name. And so this is how you execute on-demand triggers via the REST API. And we're going to execute some server-side JavaScript code. Now I'm going to do a hotkey here, but it's the equivalent of pasting from GitHub. So what this is doing is we're getting the current member right here. Let me just scroll this up here. And then when a board is created, we're triggering this via the REST API, and we're adding it to this object. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Then we're going to hop back into the application, and not Calvin's board. Like so. I'm going to just set this as public for fun. And here we go. One thing that you can do when you create a trigger, so I'm just going to hop back into here real quick, is you can actually test an action here. Okay, but we need to hop into our Angular application and change some stuff. And so this is in the README. One moment here. There we go. So when we get the boards, like so, then this calls add board members, which then goes through and calls get board members and does some stuff. So let's try this one more time. Okay, Calvin's board. Yes. And let's hop back into the user board. Data. Boom, done. Okay, so what it's done is it's pushed this into the user board object. So the takeaway here is this. Using RESTful API, we are able to, let me hop into my object real quick. You can see this. You can perform arbitrary actions such as tying things into other tables. You can also, where this gets important is if you're making a call, you could also do this HTTP call from Angular, but occasionally there's times that you want to obscure particular things from the client. So for instance, what if you were making a third-party call and you had to store your API keys, for instance? This would be an excellent place to store that. Okay, so moving along, let's try this one more time. And here I am. So this is actually the local instance. So local board. Okay. And then if I go back into here, boards, then actually user boards. Let's go to data. And then now this is actually the one that I wanted. So here, ID 2, member 1. So we're saying this member belongs to this board. I'm the number 1 member, and I belong to this board. So let's set up another server-side action. So what happens, for instance, if you want to perform some validation pre-commit? So we'll go to actions, and I am going to create another action, and what we're going to do is we'll select this to be create before adding data. So you have create, update, and delete. And I'm going to call this just update due date. And we're also going to do some server-side JavaScript here. And I have a hotkey for this. And so what this does is it grabs a date, and then it automatically sets 7 days on top of that, and then we set the due date property on the user input. So user input is the object that's coming in from the user. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and let's test. This is due, so I'm just manipulating this object here. Test action, and you can see the REST URL that I called. And then if I go back here and I refresh this, now you can see that this board was created from Backend, but it got a due date, which is pretty neat. Let's take this one step further, and let's send an email after you have created an object. So maybe you have an order system, and somebody just placed an order, and you would like to send your mother an email saying, I just got an order, I'm not going to be a failure forever, here's the proof right here. So boards, let's go to actions again. I'm done with this one, but let's create a new action. And we're just going to call this send email. And let's do this saved and committed. And we're going to send an email. Now, if you notice these anchors here, you can click on this and we can choose a few various things. For instance, you can choose username, and it automatically populates this. And then from here, we can say this, and we'll choose the anchor again, and we'll choose user input title. Holla at your boy. L. So let's save this. And we're going to call this the money board. Description is 99 problems. And let's see. Hopefully I don't have an embarrassing email here. Okay, so Calvin is sending me boards, hate mail, love it. And so usually I've found that there is generally like a 40 to 60 second delay here, but if we were to come back, this will show up, and so maybe we will check this in a little bit. But rest assured, if Calvin is sending me emails, then why can't I send myself emails? It's only logical. All right, things are about to get real up in here. We are going to take this one step further, and we've seen some actions. So we saw on a pre-commit to actually do something, such as a validation, as it's being or using a REST API as a trigger, we can do something else, and on a post-commit, we can do something like send an email. Actions are pretty rad, but you can also set up custom queries, which is fantastic. So we're going to create a new query. And just like triggers, you can call these as parameters in your REST calls. So we would like, for instance, when you get a board, to get all the members for that board. And so now you can see here, I'm just going to zoom this out just a bit. We're calling get, and now we are calling a query that is called get board members. So let's go ahead and create this. Get board members. And I believe this takes a board ID. And so here it goes. Again, using this handy anchor tool, I'm able to create a variable within this query. And so what this is doing is saying, grab me the boards that is either public or this user belongs to. I'm going to save this, and let's test the query. And so there happens to be 2 users for, so rather this is actually grabbing the users, not the boards. I had that reversed, but it's saying, give me all the users for this board. Now let's go back to my code, because we need to update a few things to get this working in Angular. So the first thing we're going to do is, this has actually already been fixed. Then let's go into create. And we're going to call get user boards, which is calling this custom query that we just set up. So if I go here and I refresh this application, so you can see here that when I select this dropdown, you can see that I have a single collaborator on local board, but I can select this one, and now I have 2. So now you can add collaborators to the board. And so how this is working in Angular, just to reiterate, is we created a custom query called get board members, and we're passing in the board, and it's grabbing essentially all the members for the board. And let's see what this is being called. Yikes. So when add board members gets called, so when we call get user boards, then here we are calling add board members, which then calls get board members, which then does this custom query. So pretty powerful stuff. We're able to do this with very little code in Backend and not have to reason how we're going to do this in Angular. So let's take this a step further. This is the halfway point of the examples. So let's show boards based on a member. So we're going to invert this. So we've seen the boards and the members. Now let's show the boards for a member. So we have this custom query here called get boards based on current user, and we're passing in a parameter of is public. And so because this is what we set in the code, this is what I'm going to set here, and it is public. So this is the parameter. And then from here, we'll go here. We'll just replace this with username, and we will replace this with is public. I may have added that twice, so we'll just put it in once. Save. And so now we can get our public board, which is, in this case, just local board. And then from here, I need to hop into the board controller.js, and we will, instead of getting all the boards, we're going to just get user boards. Okay? So now we're saying, don't give us all the boards, give us just the boards that we have access to. Let's go back here. And now I'm grabbing just this local board because this is what I created. But let's do something else real quick. Can you see me? I'll set this to public. And so this is how you show boards for a particular user. And how this is working is we're doing some SQL, which is above my pay grade. Thank you, Ty, for writing that. With test query. And so now I have two boards. So I'm seeing local board because I created it, and then I'm seeing public board because it's public. All right, so I have 3 more demos left that I'm going to run through. Let's create another action on the boards object here. And what we're going to do is a lot of times people ask about, well, can I actually log something? You know, can I keep kind of detailed logs about the data transformations or the transformations on my objects? So we're going to go to actions, and we're going to create a new action. And we'll select the trigger as during data saved, but before committed, and it's just called update history, okay? And so now the hair on my neck is literally standing up. We are gonna do ties tsql. And so insert into history, board, old data, new data. And so from here, we're just going to replace this with ID. Then we want to take this old crusty data and go with board's title. And we're going to refresh it with I think I needed an input parameter here. Oh, there it is, title. Parameters, boom, thank you. Okay, and I'm going to save this. And let's go ahead and test this. Okay, and from here, let's go into history, data, and I didn't really change it to anything. So let's go back and try this again. This is now going to become the updated board. We'll go back here, data, and you can see now we've stored this log. So pretty neat. We're able to just jump in, add this little bit of SQL after the event hook, and do something clever. Let's talk about sign up. When you create a backend application, by default, it is a private application. So that means you are added to the application as well as anybody that you manually add. So this is good for like internal applications where you want to control access. But what we can do here is make this app public. And so once you make your application public, anybody can actually register and create an account on your application. And so if we go here, we'll go localhost, and I'm going to create a new user. I don't really work for Backend, but I should see about getting this email. New user, and now I was able to create an account. So, pro tip, if you want people to sign up from the public, make your app public. And now, for the grand finale. This is my favorite demo, kind of one of those moments where like, I can't believe that actually worked. That's super awesome. And let's see some third-party integration. Specifically, we're going to do an AWS S3 upload, which I think is really, really cool. So we'll hop into our backend, go to our objects, notes, and we are going to create a new action. And I need to hop into my notes model. And if you zoom down here, you can see that we have a custom action called upload to S3. And so hopefully this pattern is starting to emerge that give this an action and execute via REST API and server-side JavaScript code. Let me just zoom this up here. And so what we have going on here, let's see if I make this a little bigger. This is for a public S3 bucket that Backend has provided. And so these are the keys and the secrets that exist. If you wanted to have this go to your specific bucket, you would just need to replace that. And then from here, we are just calling put file S3. So this is this S3 integration. And we are returning the response. Let's go ahead and save this and refresh the page. I'm going to create a new board called shopping list. Then I'm going to hop into this and let's create a new note called by this. Hooray. And from here, I'm going to choose this vehicle. And what it did is it took that image and it posted it up to Backend. And using just this bit of code here, we were able to then push it right into S3, super easy, and we are good to go. So most of these demos, I would wager that you could walk through each one of these examples within the repo in somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes. The takeaway here is that the simple Note app, Notorious, is a fully functional, full-fledged Angular app that you're then able to go through and piecemeal and add in these integrations. And so this is kind of a sample platter of some things that you can do with Backend and Angular. I really hope that everyone takes the application, plays around with it, changes the color, changes the logo, and then goes and sells it to a client for lots of money. You have permission. Using the event hooks or the actions, the custom queries, I think the social sign-on and the third-party integration, that is a lot of power that, I know we kind of blew through a lot of this in approximately 90 minutes, but you can use these. These are, I think, some sampling of some really powerful things that you can start to integrate into your Angular applications. With that said, here are a few resources. So obviously, Simple Notorious app. If you go to backend.com, there are some how-to videos where we kind of walk through some of this stuff. You may recognize the subtle, dulcet tones of the narrator. It is me, I admit, as well as there's a pretty good blog. And speaking of pretty good blogs, onehungrymind.com. And so if anybody has any Angular questions, feel free to shoot me an email through the contact form. And you can also catch me on Twitter at Simpleton. That's Simpulton.